What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Other Hours podcast, the podcast where we talk about how God doesn't want to just make you good at church, He wants to make you good at life. Today, we are taking the Other Hours international with a very special guest straight out of Belize, my good friend, Pastor Kenny Welch. Welcome to the show, Kenny.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Brandon.
So this has been a long time coming. We've been talking for the last couple months about having you on the show, and you're in the United States. So, of course, I had to sit down with you and have a chat. So I'm excited to have you here. Thank you for joining me. I'm really stoked about this, honestly, Kenny.
Yeah.
So anyways, I know you really well. We spent a lot of time together over the last couple of years. We spent 3 months in very close proximity with one another a couple of years ago, but not everyone here at Living Streams or our subscribers really know a ton about you or about your story. And so today I would love to just spend some time getting to know you better, helping people understand the connection that Living Streams has with Belize and kind of the whole backstory there. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing a little about yourself, what you do as far as your pastoring in Belize, and kind of how you first got connected with Living Streams, the church. So,
all right. So I'm from Belize, of course, a small village in Belize, Gales Point, Manatee Village. That was where I met David Stockton a number of years ago, probably 11 or 12. But that's where the connection with Living Stream started. That's where me as a serious Christian started. That's where ministry for my life started, and the ministries that we're actually leading now in Belize. Gales Point, small village, 300 plus people, very tight knit. Everybody feels like family. Everybody is considered to be family. But there's also, a dark side of people not living the way that God calls us to live, and a lot of that has to do with the culture. People are not willing to walk away from the culture and to pursue righteousness as they should. And it was really a neat thing when David felt called by the Lord to go down to Gales Point, a place where he's even unsure how he's going to survive, to raise up oaks of righteousness in this place, And that's where it all began for me and for many other people in Gales Point who are still, walking the walk, still living the faith.
For sure. So you grew up in Gales Point, this little tiny village in the middle of Belize, about 300 people. What was that like growing up in that cultural context?
Well, growing up was always, I wouldn't say easy, but it was good, We had good upbringing, but for some weird reason, a lot of young people, including myself, for some point in time, actually, turned away or started to walk in an opposite direction as to how we were actually taught. Church was always a thing for us. It was sort of religious. You go to church on Sunday because that's what people do. People go to church on Sunday, but there was no real depth to church, from my perspective at least. It was just something we do. And you're expected to live respectful, respect the adults, the old people, be mannerly and all that. So, but it was always like family. Gales Point is, everybody look out for everybody, just like a real family. There's times when we love each other, unconditionally, and there's time when we fight, just like your siblings at home. So that was, I grew up in Gales Point. I left the village to go to high school, when I was 12 years old, did high school, junior college, still going back and forth, because it's home. And then right when I started the University of Belize, that was when David came along with his vision to plant some oaks of righteousness in Gales Point.
That's awesome, man. So what was it like, your family situation growing up? I know that I've heard a little bit about your mom and how her influence, how strong that was in your life, and as far as pointing you towards eventually getting to know Jesus and all that kind of stuff. What was that situation like for those of us who don't really know that whole backstory?
Well, my mom, she was like you said, very influential in the way I was raised. She pretty much taught me life. I grew up without a dad, but I grew up as the first grandchild in the house that still had the grandparents. So I was kind of like the little brother to all my uncles. I mean, so much so to the point where I actually call my grandma mom, and I always call my mom by her first name because that is what everybody else in the house did.
Right.
So it was kind of the norm, like, okay, this is Hannah, and then mom is, grandma. Yeah, but I mean, it was good. She sacrificed a lot, to kind of make sure I got an education, taught me pretty much everything I needed to know as I was growing up.
Right. And your whole family they were all followers of Jesus in some capacity, right? What was your exposure like? You said that your experience in church was primarily just, this is a thing that we do because it's kind of a part of our cultural norm. When did that really begin to change? When did you actually feel like you began to really genuinely encounter the Lord and begin an actual relationship with him?
Well, I mean, that changed significantly for me when I met David. But even before that, it was because there was Methodist, Anglican, all these different churches that you could go to. And that is just what we did, go to church. Like of course, you were intentional about going to church on Sunday,
Right.
It's part of the culture, but you weren't intentional about, doing church or being a part of church. I actually, growing up, never ever saw myself being deeply involved in church at all. It was just a Sunday thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're still experiencing that now. On the opposite side, you're now a pastor of a church now in Belize City, as well as overseeing the church in Gales Point. Did that ever cross your mind that you might potentially be? I mean, you just said, I don't really imagine seeing myself in a position of leadership. Did that ever cross your mind when you were younger? Like, oh, I could actually have influence.
Like I said, never ever. It was just something we did on Sunday. Even when David came for the first year, he talked me into getting involved with, the discipleship program, the internship and all of that. And it was cool. We hang out. We learned a lot about Jesus. We learned how to live the right way, as opposed to just living culturally or living in sin. I was involved after David left and Jude was there for a few months in helping him out with youth groups and all of that. But I never saw myself being heavily involved, I was in school. I was getting a degree in marine science and biology, which is like almost on the opposite side of the spectrum. I was, according to everybody else, supposed to be somebody, the guy who would go, get a good job, have the education and all that. It wasn't a part of my plans whatsoever to be involved in church or to even, be involved in ministry, so to speak.
Yeah, and then that all changed. David kind of showed up on the scene, kind of took you aside, began to really pour into you, and then what was that process after that? So David shows up and begins to build a relationship with you, and then there was a number of years that passed between then and you actually being considered to be kind of in this pastoral position. Is that right?
Well, it was really only 1 year, which was crazy because, as I shared with the guys at the camp this weekend, David pulled me and Shannon aside and he showed us this path. He drew it out for us how the entire community continues to walk one single path. And that's the path that's been passed down from generation to generation. And what the Lord desires is for just a few young people to start to carve out a new path, something that would go in a different direction so that other people can see and say, oh, there is more than one option as to how we can live our lives. And it was cool. It made a lot of sense, very interesting. But then when David left, Jude was there for a little bit, and then Mike Pfeiffer was supposed to come down. And David said, you're going to like Mike because, Mike is crazy. Of course, that's just a joke. But then when Mike came, And I asked Mike, what do you want me to do to help, just to help out, I'm just offering help. And he was pretty much like, I don't know yet, but I'll let you know. And then he came back and he said to me, you're going to start preaching on Sundays. And then I was like, David was right. This guy is crazy, because that is like, I'm just a young guy. We don't do that. Kids don't preach in church, like pastors are considered to be old men, culturally. Yep. Nobody's going to listen to me. And besides that, I have no intentions of leading a church. So why would I start preaching on Sundays? But weird as it sounded, he asked me to do some stuff. I did it. We met, we studied the word. And before I knew it, I preached a service on Sunday.
Awesome. Do you remember what you preached on that first Sunday?
Not entirely, but it was the weirdest day of my life. I mean, you've been to the church. The church has 3 doors, one to the east, one to the west, and then one to the south. And that was my focus for the entire message. I was looking through the front door, not at anybody. And there was this lady in the crowd, Miss Vera. She was a missionary. She kept snapping her fingers in the back just to get my attention. But as soon as I would draw my face from the door to her, I completely swung the opposite direction to the next door. And I did that the entire message, just from door to... I didn't want to see anyone in the building. It was like... I was so afraid of what was going on. I had no idea what was going on. It was crazy.
What was that like? I mean, this is like you said, this is a small community. We're talking 300 people. Most of them related in some way. Like, you're really addressing family. And I mean, if you think about it in the word, it says like Jesus is talking about the fact that a prophet's never respected in his own hometown. And I think that if you're in ministry for any length of time, you kind of begin to feel that like it's really hard to be able to minister to family effectively because there's that familiarity. What was that like, standing in front of a group of people that you've known your entire life? They've known you, they know everything about you, and now they're supposed to look at you as a source of spiritual authority. What was that experience like for you?
It was weird. Rightly, as Jesus said, a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. And I felt that way for as long as I can remember. It was always, first, I was considered too young, all the pastors that we have had before were men who were way up in age, 60s or 70s. And here's this 21-year-old kid, talking to people that are 2 or 3 times my age, So it was just weird, having to figure out how do I address these people,
right.
How do I bring the word of God? Yet, because to some degree I wanted to function in submission to all the grown adults who were in the church. I mean, they watched me grow up. They knew everything about me, There is nothing that I can come and say, no, this is how it should be. And then they go, but that's how it wasn't that way with you. I watched you grow up. What are you trying to say? And of course, one of the cultural thing is that, old people know what is best. So it's hard for young people to just come up and say, no, that's not how it should be, because they're old. They have the experience, So it was weird, and still is to a large degree with some people. But now being, in ministry there for 10 years, it has completely turned around, my desire to function as the authority, from the Lord, it has been clearly spelled out to me, and I'm functioning differently in that regard, and people are receiving me differently, than they were or would be 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Of course, at the beginning, everybody just thought it was all for the show. Like, it's not going to last. These kids, they're going to grow up and realize that they can't do this. They can't be in ministry. They can't lead the church. And it is only by the grace of God that we were able to silence those people, by Him allowing us constantly to be able to push through all those things, all those obstacles that were there before us.
Right. And now, this has been a long time coming. This is, like you said, it's been 10 years. You're just now in your early 30s, and you've already been, there's not a lot of people that can say they've been in ministry for a decade at that age. But yet you've been faithful. And I think that that's been the thing that has really impressed everyone here at Living Streams, looking at what's been happening in Belize, is the fact that you've stayed the course and you've continued to remain an oak of righteousness in that community. And having had some firsthand experience, you know what I mean? What David is saying is absolutely true. There is a definite path in Gales Point that says this is how you're going to live your life. And it's kind of the expected norm that that's just how things are. And you and a few others, Shannon, have kind of forged a different path. And now there are actually young people in Gales Point, some of them that came and were part of an internship this summer here at Living Streams, that are starting to take that path less traveled. And I mean, what does that feel like to you now, actually seeing a new generation of young people that are beginning to really pursue righteousness and beginning to follow in the footsteps that you began to set forth even a decade ago?
That is, I mean, it brings me great joy to see that most of the young people that we have in the village have a deep desire to walk this new path that has been carved out for them. For as much as they are seeing the destructive path, they're being drawn to it because, you know, that is all the generation before us knows.
Right.
They're very interested in this new path. Now, where it's difficult for me and more so for my wife is that because I've taken up the pastorate at PLCC in the city, we're not able to be in Gales Point as much as we would like to. Mm-hmm. So the way we live our lives or put it on display for people to see is not as much as we would like it to be when it comes to dealing with those youths that we love and care about so much, you know, and these youths, they're always looking for opportunity to just be around us, to learn from us, you know, to just to hear from us. And I mean, this summer, my wife decided that we were going to go just like for a month straight, you know, just to be there, just to get involved again, you know, to figure out what is going on with these young people and to try and help them as much as possible. And, you know, she did it mainly by herself because I had to be back and forth to the city where I have obligation. But she stuck it out, her and the girls, you know, they spent 5 weeks in Gales Point, you know, just doing life with these kids because they're yearning for something different, you know, they want something different. And when they recognize what that is, they just gravitate to it. Yeah. You know, I always ask the question. I have a mentor that I connect with on a regular basis. He lives in Minnesota, and he asked me the question first, like, you know, why do you think it is that all these youths, you know, and people who seem to have a desire to follow Christ just gravitate to you and your family? And of course, I have no idea. And it's a question that I've been asking myself lately, you know, what is it about me? What is it about my little family that makes people just gravitate to us? You know, I mean, we're nothing special, you know, but even the kids, like when we show up to the village specifically, you know, like all the kids that are Anaya's age, they're always at the house. 8 o'clock in the morning, we're not even out of bed yet, and there's like 10 kids waiting outside. And I'm like, what is this? Like, Anaya's no better than the other kids in the village, so why is everybody? You know, and then of course the youths, they completely took over the house for the 5 weeks. So it's kind of like, you know, living with 20 teenagers. You know, people sleeping all over the place. It was crazy, but it was good, you know, because we're doing life with these kids, doing life with these youths, and they always have questions, and, you know, they're trying to figure out, you know, how do they walk this new path that has been carved out before them. And it's just a beautiful thing. It brings me great joy to know that it is actually a path that was designed by God. Yeah. And He's using it, you know, to bring all these kids to Him.
I love that. Yeah, let's talk about the difference between those two paths. So just to kind of, in more explicit terms, for people listening and watching, what was it like when you were 16, 17 years old in Gales Point, trying to navigate this new path, and how is that different from what it is to be a 16, 17-year-old now in Gales Point a decade later? Could you just kind of illustrate just the difference in kind of the gravitational pull, as it were?
Yeah, so I mean, as anywhere else, there's always a path that has been taken for years. And for us there, it would be young men, you know, alcohol, marijuana, more than one woman. That's the norm. That's what's expected. If you're not with the in crowd, then something is wrong with you. If you're 16 years old and you haven't proven that you have a girlfriend, then something is definitely wrong with you. There's no 16-year-old who's not gonna have a girlfriend. You're not hanging out with everybody else. You're not doing the same thing. You're not using the same words they're using. Then something is wrong. And because for a while there was no other option than to do those things, that is what everybody would follow.
Right.
Only the weird kids who would not leave their house, only stay home and be, all to themselves would not be following that. So for us to start saying that, hey, look, there is a new path. You don't have to smoke weed to be a man. You don't have to be drunk all the time to be a man. You don't have to be with more than one female to be a man. This is what God designed. And of course, we could say that all day long, but until someone starts to live it, then it has no weight on people. So to be married at a young age was laughable, so to speak. I had a guy come up to me and be like, I give you 1 year. It's like 1 year. He's like, 1 year and your marriage will be done. Because, it's not expected that any young guy culturally would stick to one woman.
Right.
So that in itself, being married, staying faithful to one woman is a new thing. Even before, 3 or 4 generations ahead, people would be married, but then it wouldn't be a faithful marriage.
Right.
So for them to see that being played out the way God desired to be played out was new. For them to see, young men and women not indulging in the party and the drinks and the marijuana, and the crazy living is new for them. But still there is that pull from culture and society that is being placed on the youth, that peer pressure of, hey, you need to get with this. I mean, you're 16 and your parents don't allow you to go to wild parties. What's wrong? So there's always, how do I be friends with these people who desperately wants to pull me to destruction and still walk this path that I know is right for me? And that is still the struggle for the youths. But the good thing is they can now see clearly the difference in the two paths, and now they have to make a choice. Whereas before, in my time, we knew that there was something different, but nobody was living it out.
Right.
So it was not seen. We only knew that you could live different, but we weren't seeing anybody, in our age or just right in the generation before us that was on the ground living out this life. But now the youths have that.
Yeah. And it's not just the young people that are kind of experiencing the transformation. I remember you telling me that 10 years ago, half the village or more than that were, these people that have been in long-term relationships, these couples that are living together, have a whole bunch of kids, but they never got around to getting married. And that was just not part of the cultural norm, and Gail's point. And you've actually conducted a number of marriages for couples that have been together for 20 years or something like that. Isn't that right? Well,
I didn't conduct it, but they did it legally, There's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 couples who have been together for longer than I am alive. They have kids way older than I am, and they were never married. But they got married, I guess, say between a span of 5 years. So it's something's happening. Something's changing. People are seeing the need to live right before God and man, and some of them are taking that opportunity to make it right, and then others are just waiting it out. I don't know what they're waiting for, but they're just waiting it out.
I know. I remember talking about that a couple of years ago, and that was such a foreign concept, I think, for someone coming in from an outside perspective, and because that's just not part of our cultural expression really in the United States. And so it's definitely different. 10 years down the road, Gales Point's a very, very different place. And I love how you're kind of expressing the difference in those two different paths. And it's incredibly encouraging for me too, just to be able to see there are these young people that have been truly invested in for the majority of their lives now, and are really beginning to take steps to walk in righteousness. What is your hope for the next decade? If you look at where Gales Point was 10 years ago, where it is today, where do you hope that it will be 10 years in the future?
Well, definitely in a better place. I'm hoping that with most of these youths that we have now, if they take the new path and don't just walk it, but take it very seriously to the point where they now get involved in investing in the lives of the younger kids who are coming up, then we're going to be a completely different village in the next decade. Because then it's not going to be just 2 or 3 families living out this new path, but it's going to be a bunch of people. You're going to have 10%, 20% of the village living out this new path, but not just living it out, encouraging the younger kids to live it out.
Right.
And we're going to have a greater impact. We're going to bring back the true feel of community where we dwell together in harmony and we live together in love, and that is going to change the village drastically.
That's so
if we continue down that path for the next decade.
Right. And I've oftentimes heard that it doesn't take an overwhelming majority in order to change culture. It just takes that 10, 20, 30% that are genuinely pursuing something that can transform an entire culture. And that's what we're seeing. You've got a handful of people in the village who are living righteously, who are beginning to really forge that new way of living. And now there are people who are getting kind of pulled in that direction for the first time maybe ever. And I mean, I'm sure that's encouraging for you, but now you got a little bit of a different situation going on. I remember a couple of years ago when I was down in Gales Point with you, that was shortly after you were asked to come and pastor a church in Belize City a few hours away. What has that been like for the past few years, living in the city, being separated from friends and family in Gales Point, but also trying to maintain connection, trying to continue to pastor that church in Gales Point while living in a different city? How has that worked out for you?
Well, it's working out okay. Stressful sometimes, but it's working out okay. I mean, my hope and my desire is that one of the young men in the village would be raised up and eventually start leading the church.
Right.
I mean, it would be good if I can show up once a month or so to assist, but to just have someone who we can say, here, take this church and run with it. Take these people and shepherd them well. That's my hope. So we're just pouring out into people now, and we're going to see, what the Lord does. I have the bulk of my commitment is in the city, and I don't think it's right for me to shortchange the people in the city just because I want to be connected to the people in Gales Point. The connection has already been established. I am family to the people in Gales Point. That's never going to go away.
Right.
But at the same time, there needs to be someone else who will be involved every day in the people's lives. And right now, I cannot be involved every day. I mean, I can show up on the weekend, but I think when we get someone or raise someone up that is going to be involved every day with the people, it's going to spark a whole new change, in the village.
Right. And I mean, over the last few years, the Lord has just sort of taken your influence and just expanded it exponentially, from having a place of prominence in a village of 300 people, now living in Belize City where a third of the population of Belize lives. You have so many more opportunities to minister to completely different people than you did before. How's that been different for you? Have you had to kind of adapt or change the way that you do ministry now that you're ministering to people in Belize City rather than in Gales Point?
I think the culture kind of, goes across into the city. We pretty much face some of the same things, but I haven't really been able to do as much as I thought I would be able to do due to minor circumstances. So like one of the philosophy that I hold to is that I desire to have at least somewhat of a clean house before I bring people in. It's a good thing to think about. So what I've been trying to do over the past 2 years in the city is what I consider to be a little bit of house cleaning just within the little church, PLCC. And then starting next year, or maybe just late this year, we're going to be very heavy on evangelism in the neighborhood that the church is in.
Right.
You know, because I firmly believe that we'll be able to do more with 20 or 30 people who are rooted in Jesus than we would with 100 people who are just here or there.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I want the people that we have now to be deeply rooted so that when we go out, when we bring people in, it's going to have a big effect on them. Because you know how it is, more is caught than taught.
Yeah.
We can go out and we can tell people all they need to know. But when they come in and they see how we live, then, you know, they'll be able to tell whether we're genuine or not. You know, and I want whatever is going to be caught by them to be impactful.
Absolutely. What kind of differences are you experiencing in terms of just some of the struggles living in the city? What's kind of the gravity that's kind of pulling people in? I know that when I was there, we talked a lot about some of the gang violence, some of the difficulties you've had in the particular neighborhood in Port Loyal where you're located. If you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing a little bit more about what Belize City is like, what it's like being a Christian, leading a ministry in that particular city.
I mean, it's tough all around, but at the same time, you know, God is in control of all this, and I have a deep desire to see change happen, you know, in the men, and that's going to come when unity is seen among the men, which is why we started this little group called the Lion's Den. We meet every other Saturday morning right at PLCC, you know, early enough so that guys who has to go to work at 8 o'clock can get to go to work. And through that, we're targeting, you know, just having other pastors from other churches join us. We engage in discussion. We do life together so that, you know, some sort of unity can be developed and can be seen among the churches. Because that's one of the big things in the country on a whole, you know, like the Assemblies of God don't like the Methodists, or, you know, the Pentecostal church don't like the Calvary Chapel or whatever it is, because everybody feel like we're doing it right, you know, and those people are a little bit off the edge. And I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do together, you know, despite the theological differences we have. And I think when people really begins to see unity among the church, then it's going to be a blessing for them. Because personally, I don't care which church someone goes to as long as they're in fellowship and they're loving Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to say come over here because we have it right or we're a better church than them, you know. But if they're in fellowship, whether they're at PLCC or the church down the road, and if they're loving Jesus, it's a win for the kingdom.
Totally, yeah. How did you end up getting connected with Port Loyal Calvary Chapel? I think I'm saying that right. PLCC. What was kind of the backstory there? I don't know if I ever really caught the entire context surrounding that.
So I met Joel, who was the founding pastor. He planted the church and run it for about 13 years. I met him years ago through a missionary friend of mine, John Bjorgen. He was serving with me in Gales Point for 3 years. You know, he would occasionally be up in the city spending weekends and stuff. And he met and knew Joel, so he introduced us, and we kind of, you know, kept in contact. You know, not really regularly, but we would run into each other every so often. He invited me to a pastors conference in Guatemala. I took the opportunity to go down there with him, and we, you know, drew closer and just kept in touch and kept connected. My wife and I, we were sensing for some time that, you know, one day God would move us to the city. We had no idea what that would look like. You know, we don't know if we would be out of ministry and working, you know, a regular 8 to 5 job or what it would be. And then because Joel and I were now in contact, I knew that he was getting ready to leave. He had some guys at the church. He had already put things into place, you know, how it would all work out when he would leave. And then for some weird reason, some of the things that he had in place kept falling apart. And because he knew my wife and I were, expecting to move to the city sometime, he just, tossed out the idea of, what about coming in and taking over. Of course, it was a process that took a lot of prayer and consulting and stuff.
Right.
And we just felt that it was the right move to come in and help to lead this church. I mean, because it's a great church with great people,
Yeah, and now it's been, has it been 3 years yet, or
2 years?
2 years. And how have you seen the Lord move in the past 2 years in PLCC?
I have started or gathered a relationship with older people that I've never really had before. I mean, in Gales Point, most of the relationship with people were like middle-aged people, but here at PLCC there are some older ladies. I mean, fun people to be around. It's kind of like my Wednesday night Bible study group, and it's just developing that relationship to where you can joke with them as if you guys are the same age, and through that and just through other individuals who are in the church, some people are really growing in the Lord. They're being rooted in the Lord, and we're just hoping that would spread, that it would take off.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you've obviously got a dream for Gales Point to really begin to experience genuine revival, genuine cultural transformation. What about Belize City? What are you feeling like the Lord's calling you to, and what do you feel like the Lord's dream is for Belize City as a whole?
Well, for the city, I think it's more of a slow and steady process, because it's a big city, 80,000 people. I mean, big by our standards, because you guys have 5 million people or something. And there is actually about 80 to 90 evangelical churches in Belize City. Wow. That's in addition to Catholic and Methodist and Anglican and whatever else they are. So there is no lack of churches in Belize City for people to go to. There's just, I believe, a lack of unity among the churches, and for the churches to just come together and put the kingdom of God as the most important thing, and ministering to people. So I think for me personally, like for PLCC personally, we're just supposed to be the slow and steady light. I don't think we're called to be the big bang, to be, the church that is going to be on the forefront, big flash and carrying the whole weight. But with us just being, that steady and constant light for people to see and look at, it's going to create a lot of changes just in the neighborhood.
Right. I'm glad you brought up that idea of being just a slow and a steady light. I think that's just, it kind of encapsulates, I think, what a lot of people think about you as a person and you as a family, you and Una, and now your 2 daughters. But we do call this podcast The Other Hours, because we're not just talking about church, and we've talked a lot about church for the last few minutes here, but really that's the reason why I think that you've been so effective, is because you carry out that faithfulness in every area of your life. In Gales Point, you're not just looked at as the pastor, but you're a leader in that community. You're you're providing for people's practical needs as well. And I think that's really where you've gained a lot of respect, and I think that's why people listen to you as a spiritual authority, because you've demonstrated you care about them in other ways too. What's kind of been, as you look back over, obviously you're only in your early 30s, so you can't really look over this entire life story, right? But as you look back over your life, what kind of lessons has the Lord taught you in order for you to be faithful in those other hours that you're not looked at as Pastor Kenny up on stage, but just Kenny Welch in the village or Kenny in the city? How have you been able to cultivate faithfulness in your own walk with the Lord, in your family, in your work, in the other hours that you spend outside of Sunday morning?
Well, it's just that people are important, and for a lot of time, many people are treated like they're not, and they don't know how to deal with that. So in Gales Point specifically, I mean, people don't expect the pastor to do X, Y, Z. You know, like you're not expected to be running around with kids playing basketball. You're not expected. I mean, the idea of what a pastor should be has been somewhat misunderstood. Like, you give up all fun. There's no fun in your life. You're devoted to the word, and you're devoted to, you know, to God, and just do your job, which is preaching to the people. So just keeping those relationships, developing relationship, and showing people that they are important, you know, not just to come to church, but even outside of church, you know, because church is more than just, you know, being there on Sunday. It's doing life with people. And I believe that, you know, when I really started to do life with people, that is when great change started to happen, you know, when people really know that you care, you know, in Gales Point. And it is something that I'm lacking in Belize City right now, you know, just with the city being so hectic and all. But, you know, it's something that I've constantly been trying to put my mind to, you know, how do I get involved in people's lives? How do I show people that, you know, the relationship that we should have goes beyond just showing up on church on Sunday and say, hi, how are you doing? And then leave and we don't see each other again.
Right. Yeah, it's so important. I think something I really value about you and about your opinion is you're able to look at the church in America with a little bit of a fresh perspective because you're not in it. And so I would love to ask you, just as somebody who's not a part of the American church in the traditional sense, you're not physically present in the United States on a regular basis, but you've spent a lot of time in the U.S. over the last few years. What areas or like blind spots do you see in the American church, and what do you feel like the Lord may be speaking to the church in America that we might become stronger?
I think you guys have a lot of people, but you don't have a lot of people. You know, like there's a lot of people that comes to church, but nobody's really getting involved with what is going on at church. You know, so from what I can see, I think if everybody was involved in some way, shape, or form, just be a part of some ministry that is going on. I mean, specifically here at Living Streams, there's a lot that you guys do, but at the same time, it's the same people doing a lot. You know, and if you guys have 1,000 or 1,200 people, there's no reason why you or someone else have to do 5 things. Right. You know, when another male can get involved and be a part of 2 things, you know, in service to the Lord. So, I mean, in Belize, we don't have a lot of people, even if we have a lot going on, specifically males, you know, there's a lot of women and they're always doing everything. But I mean, here you guys have a lot of people, but when it comes to service and to serving, it doesn't look like you have a lot of people. You keep seeing the same faces over and over again involved in everything. So
in your own perspective, how should the church address that? How can we encourage people to get involved in service, get involved in activities that, I mean, I love that you said that you need to make people feel important and need to make people feel like they're worth investing in. How can we encourage our own people in the church to actually invest in relationships in the world that they live in?
Well, I mean, people just need to get beyond themselves, you know. For the most part, it's like everything here is close-knit. I mean, unless you know somebody for a long time, that would be the only way you'd hang out with them during the week or so. Because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that you've met here at Living Streams, but it's only on Sunday, or you probably run into them at a coffee shop or something. There is no real doing life. You know, I just went over to Terrell's house the other night with group of guys that he has as his small groups, and I don't know where they're all from. They don't all come to Living Streams, but it literally felt like a different family. Like, I don't even remember the name of the guys, but we were talking for hours and we had fun and we laughed together, and you know, and it's like we've known them for a long time, but as I said, I can't even remember their names right now. And I feel like when church moved from just being, oh, hi, people we know, to people that we really care about and people that are family to us, then that's going to have an impact, because it's easier for you to get someone that know and trust you to come and participate than for you to get someone who just shows up on Sunday to come and participate.
That's so true. That's really awesome. I appreciate the perspective and the insight that you bring. Like I said, kind of being able to look at the American church from a little bit of a different perspective. I know that we can sometimes get a little bit of caught in our own little feedback loop, and we're not really understanding exactly what's happening. But you're able to kind of look from a little bit of a distance and see, hey, here's some issues that you may be experiencing, and here's the solution. I love that solution is family. You know what I mean? Obviously, you grew up in a very different situation that most of us here in America did. I don't think there's very many places in America where you can only surround yourself with 300 people for your entire growing up life. But that changes you, I'm sure. You know, like you develop a value for family and a value for community that in a city of 4 million or whatever Phoenix is now, that's really, really hard to achieve. And yet the church can be that vehicle for bringing people together in genuine community where life transformation can happen. And I think that you hit the nail right on the head. I think that that's exactly where we lack, but also there's hope because the church is a family, whether we realize it or not. And so now we just need to figure out how to invest in that family more fully.
And you guys are doing a lot of things to invest in that. I mean, when you guys had that, what were they called? Fam nights, people just come out, get to know each other, interact, those were all things that were in line with moving in the right direction towards getting people to feel like they are more than just someone who come to church on Sunday. You are important. We are all important. Let's get together more often. And with the shirts you guys had, it's more than just a Sunday thing, or it's not just a Sunday thing, right. Whatever it was. It speaks volume into what church is supposed to be. Because I feel like for a while church has been slipping into this mode of just a Sunday thing, and people need to realize that it is not just that. Church is more than just showing up to the building. It's doing life with people.
That's so good, Kenny. Well, we definitely have a lot that we can learn from you and from all of our brothers and sisters in Belize, and we're just so honored to have you here. From what I heard, you did an amazing job speaking at Men's Retreat this last weekend, and I'm just so grateful that we got this opportunity to sit down and really begin to just sort of unpack your story a little bit and dive into some of those other issues relating to the other hours of life that you've lived in Belize, as well as what you've experienced here in the United States. And so I really appreciate you being here, and I'm excited for future conversations with you and with the rest of our family in Belize. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Other Hours podcast. If you have not yet subscribed to the Living Streams channel, I'd encourage you to do that. Stay tuned for future upcoming content specifically designed for you. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would encourage you also to comment. We'd love to hear your feedback, as well as questions that you might have that we can answer in future upcoming podcasts. So thank you. Have a good one.